Hi, everyone, and welcome to Tree Talks. My name is Indira. I'm an educator and teacher trainer with Tree Learning, which is an organization that focuses on developing, recruiting, and supporting educators in schools. Joining us today is Samara Gupta, who is the founder of Spark Ed, an innovative teaching and learning community with the vision of bringing meaningful research based practices into the classroom through collaboration and empowering teachers and learners. So, Samara, thank you so much for being here today. This is really exciting. So, I'd love for you to start off by telling us a little bit about your story and also our topic for discussion, which I know is something you're very passionate about.
Absolutely. Thanks, Indra. I'm actually really excited to be here and having this conversation with you. I started my journey as an educator 13 years ago when I got my master's in special education from Lesley University in Boston, America. And then I moved back to India and worked with an organization called Learning Matters Foundation in Delhi for 12 years and started my own organization, Spark Ed, last year. And, I truly believe that special education is just good quality education. And it's not for one specific group of children. And really, if we taught that way, all children would learn and, learning would be joyful and it would also lead to long term retention. And so, like you said, my goal with SparkEd is to create this innovative teaching and learning community. And so, when heard about you and got to know about tree learning, it was so wonderful because there was such synergy in our philosophies and what we believe education should be and how it needs to be reimagined and transformed for children and especially for the 21st century. So I'm thrilled that we were able to build that connection. And then, of course, this topic, that we've chosen for our talk today, which is embracing neurodiversity and supporting teachers and learners, is one that I'm so passionate about because I really believe in celebrating and recognizing the natural neurodiversity that exists amongst all children, and that we need to make the whole learning process joyful and bring joy in childhood. So often children, are going to school and either, being reprimanded or humiliated, and there's so much stress associated with it because they're not being understood or taught in a way that they learn best. So for me, one of my big goals is to really help educators, parents, understand neurodiversity, understand the strengths in neurodiversity, and then create environments where learning can be joyful.
Absolutely. And I think that's so important. And there's so much research now into neurodiversity and brain based teaching. So, can you tell us a little bit about what neurodiversity is and what your perspectives on it are?
Of course. So, neurodiversity, and I know, Indra, you've heard me say this a million times before, but neurodiversity is a biological fact. It just is. Just like we have biodiversity in our ecosystem, in the same way we have neurodiversity. It's a part of our human evolution, these variations in the way we're wired. And I think that is something that we have to recognize that there is, not a better or worse or a normal or abnormal. It is just a fact. And I know you have so many thoughts on the word normal as well.
Absolutely. I think, that it's such a problematic word, especially when you talk about kids. You label some kids as special needs and some kids as normal. And if you really look at what the word normal means, all it means is, the most common or maybe the average, not extremes of anything. But somehow we're conditioned to think that that's the right way to be. And anything that's deviating from it is wrong or bad. And I think that's a very limiting way to look at kids, especially because we only look at typically a few areas such as math or reading before we classify them as normal. Um, and there are so many other traits that make up a child, right? And I know you have a lovely quote to share on that.
Yes, so I think you've said a few things which I want to touch upon as well. So there's a lovely talk by Rosie King. It's a TED talk, and if I'm not mistaken, it was from 2014, so a while ago, but it's still as relevant. And Rosie King is autistic, and she asked the question. She goes, "What is normal?" Right? And she says, imagine if that was the best compliment you got. Oh my God, wow, you're so normal, right? I mean, why are we striving for that? Don't we want to be extraordinary and unique? Why are we trying to fit everyone into this little box? Um, and to your point about how we try and define it by certain skills that children are able to be successful at school, whether that's the sciences or the math or the language. And Sir Ken Robinson, who really was such a champion for bringing creativity into education, really said we're just educating children neck up. We're only focusing on that. We forget that there's the rest of their body. So where are the arts? Where is the dance and the movement? Why do we have this hierarchy as well in our education system, where it's the sciences and then the languages? Why doesn't everything have equal importance and weightage? um, and coming back to Rosie King as well, she ends her talk with asking that if we can't get into the minds of anyone, whether they're autistic or not, rather than punishing them for not being normal, why don't we celebrate their uniqueness? And I think it's so important, especially like you said, that today there is so much research. We know so much about neuroscience and how the brain learns. And there's so much more awareness today about neurodivergence that and neurodiversity that we need to start hearing voices from the neurodivergent community. Till now, it's been, one view and, a certain set of people trying to define what neurodiversity is or neurodivergence is. But we need to start listening to the neurodivergent community to understand their thinking and what they want, rather than us trying to force our neuronormative expectations on people and children and trying to get them to fit within that box, or worse, even change them to meet the neuronormative norms. um,
Absolutely. I think you touched upon a really important thing that when as much as we want to support them, we also have to empower them to be able to take decisions and, as you said, not fit in with our normative expectations of them. And there's actually a quote that I came across, which is really interesting, which is that definitions belonged to the definers, not the defined. And what it means is that, yes, while labels and categories can be useful to help support the child, we should remember that they're not absolutes, that they're not fixed, and more importantly, that they represent only a part of the child. And it often just throws a spotlight only on the negatives, and it sort of forces the positive traits into the background. So the question is, how can we as educators provide that support, but also not limit the child and our expectations of them, which research shows is directly linked to student achievement.
oh, absolutely. I think there's so much to unpack in what you said as well, Indra. And I know this is a short talk, but I will try and pick up on a few things that you said as well. And labels is one of those things that I've struggled with. And my approach to labels has also grown over the last 13 years. And I think, for some children and adults, labels are really empowering because suddenly it gives definition to things that have been challenging or they've struggled with. And they realize that, hey, this is just the way I'm wired. It's not because I'm not trying hard enough. It's not because I'm lazy or any of those reasons. It's the way I'm wired. And suddenly there's an explanation for it. Um, Where labels become hindrances is exactly what you said, is when inherent in the word, in the label are words like deficit or disorder or disability, it immediately makes us focus on the negative. And we stop looking at children with their strengths. And all children have strengths. And I think it's so important for us as educators, as parents, to use a strength-based model. And I think that's one of the things, if you're in a classroom and you have a child that you think is distracted, actually flip that on its head and look at it as the child being curious and wanting to know about so many things. And that's why they're asking you all these questions or noticing things in their environment. And that child can then be the child that kicks off all the brainstorming, right? That happens in a classroom. You have a child that needs to move to stay stimulated. That can be the child that helps you create movements to memorize the multiplication tables, because we know when we use movement, it aids memory, and it's a much stronger neural connection to help with long-term memory. Or if you have a child that you think, okay, is daydreaming or getting lost, that can be the child that comes up with, the wildly imaginative stories in classrooms. So, really looking at the strengths of each child and giving them those opportunities to use their strengths to shine. And I think as teachers, we need to really begin by thinking, what is our view of a child? How do we view children? If we view them as capable, confident, wanting to succeed, trying hard enough, and look at our role as one of a facilitator and a co-collaborator of learning, then we've already set the stage where we are building a strong connection and trust with children and really setting them up for successful learning. But like you were saying, if we have limitations or start trying to define children, then really there's going to be a breakdown. And I know you talk about having a growth mindset versus a fixed mindset as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it again comes back to that. Are we, telling children that their abilities are limited, that they only can do what they believe they're fixed with and they can't change? Or are we telling them that with effort, with the right support, that they can grow and that they can get away from the labels of I'm bad at math or I'm stupid or any of those really negative things, and really get them to explore and not view failure as a negative thing, but and just learn that they can grow with the right support. And I know this is something that is so close to both of our hearts, that the way we can support children in the classroom. So would you like to lead us to that, to some ways that teachers can actually support their learners in the
Of
class?
course. And I think, with growth mindset, it's not only important for children to have that, but even for the teachers to have that. Because their perspectives, their way will actually help children have a growth mindset or a fixed mindset. And it's really to understand that if we have 30 children in a classroom, that's 30 different minds we have in a classroom. And not everyone is going to learn in the same way, and they all may have strong learning styles that are different. And if we are teaching in just one way, which is the lecture method or chalk and talk method, we're already disabling a lot of the children in our classroom. And that is what typically happens. It's actually the curriculum or our approach that's disabling children, not the other way around. And so it's so important for us to use different modalities, and whether that is auditory, visual, support the auditory with visual, use our body's kinesthetic touch, let children do something with that information. And these aren't only strategies to reach all learners, but these are also strategies, and we know from neuroscience, that lead to long-term learning. And I know for some teachers, it sometimes feels so overwhelming. How am I going to do this? How will I bring movement in, and how will I, bring the visuals in? And it's so much work. But actually, in the long term, you're actually, really helping children be successful. And so you're not going to have to go over that material over and over again, because they have built strong neural connections. And I think sometimes just providing some examples might just be a little helpful. So, for example, if you have to teach a spelling rule, and say you're teaching the spelling, the suffix OUS, which says us, like in the word joyous. You can do a little acting out, and there's a program called Secret Stories, and they have the most wonderfully, animated stories for different spelling rules. And for the OUS rule, it's like, okay, imagine there are three children together, and you're about to play a game, and then two of them start huddling and hugging each other and going, us, we want to be in one team, and then there's one that's always left out, right? And that's how you teach the rule OUS. Now, when kids are going to act this out, there's no way they're going to forget this or watch their friends act it out. You can have other kids that are then generating words that end with us. You can have a child that is really creative and draws beautifully, draw a visual for this. So if in our teaching, and we bring in different modalities like this, we'll be reaching most learners in our classroom. And then to practice the spellings, you play games like bingo, you play 4 in a row, you play tic-tac-toe, you do these games which also translate onto online teaching so easily, that you're making learning fun and really creating opportunities for it to be meaningful and for learning to stick. So I think that's one way that we can try and reach most learners in our classroom. And then also knowing that we shouldn't only have one way of assessment for children. And this was an exercise I used to do in some of my teacher training workshops. And we would ask teachers or the participants that were there to show us how they went from their home to their place of work. And it was open-ended, and we just left it there. And of course, you had hands raising up and being like, no, but what exactly do you want? And how should we show this? And like, okay, this is completely open-ended. And what you realized at the end of this exercise was some people wrote down steps. I got out of my house, I took the first left at the traffic light, I went right, I went straight for 2 kilometers, and then this. And then you had another set of participants that actually drew it out like a map. Now, both sets of groups met the task and reached their goal because they showed us how they got from home to their place of work. The way they did it was different. And I think we need to allow children those opportunities as well in class. That if I want children to retell the sequence of a story, some may write it down, others may draw it like a comic strip. Another set of children might want to act it out and show you what happened in the beginning, what happened in the middle, what happened at the end, and someone might want to create a rhyme about it. Yeah. All of the children have shown you they comprehended the text and can recall in sequence. Just the way they show that to you is different.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think, it's teachers sometimes get a little intimidated by the idea of how am I going to introduce all of these different methods, and maybe they might feel like they're not creative enough to think of these things. But I mean, just from the example that you pointed out, which were great. I mean, it doesn't have to be complicated. It doesn't have to involve a lot of materials and things like that. It's just, I think if there are just some golden rules that teachers could remember, which is to make learning fun, to get kids to, as you said, act it out, just express their creativity, and also I think be a little flexible in how children can express their learnings, and understand that even if it's not all written down or ticked off in a multiple choice test, you're seeing evidence of the child's learning, and that's okay, because long-term learning is the goal ultimately. And so I think the examples that you gave are wonderful. And it's also, I think now, especially, I'm so glad you brought up in an online context, because that's what we've been dealing with for a while now. And I think differentiation could actually happen in an online setting just as easily, when because online it lends itself to a little bit more flexibility in the variety of resources that teachers can provide to their students. You can really tailor, a little more detailed and complicated resources for kids who want to explore further, who are able to understand, and simpler resources of videos for kids who may need more time. You also get more flexibility on how long you take to understand something, and also the way you express it. So there are a lot of pros, I think, to online learning right now, and how teachers can actually use this to meet the needs of all the students. Would you agree, Samara?
Absolutely, I do. And, I think, again, I just want to pick up on some of the things that you said, Indra. And, one of them is, sometimes teachers feel like we're not creative enough or we don't know what else. And I think if you look at yourself as a co collaborator in the learning process and you let children take the lead, children are innately creative, right? If you let them take the lead, they will give you a million different ideas, right? You don't have to do all the thinking. Put the onus on them. Let them do the thinking and say, how are you going to show me
Yeah.
your learning? Right? And let them use their preferred mode first. And there are such advantages, and we do in lifelong learning also do need the skill of being able to take tests and things. So I'm not saying that it's one or the other, but let them show you their learning in their preferred way and then work towards that taking of the test.
Exactly.
Right? But it shouldn't be only one way. And I think with online learning, for some children, it has been so advantageous, right? Because they're in their home setting, they're comfortable, they're safe, and that removes some of the pressure from being in school. Whereas for some other children, the cognitive load of seeing 30 different boxes on the screen and different moving parts, and managing the distractions at home because there's the pet that's playing or your younger sibling that's going around or different things. So sometimes for some children, the cognitive load has been far too much, which has put enormous pressure on teachers because they're having to deal with so many moving parts and variables. And really, teachers have gone above and beyond in this last year and a half. But I do think it's about knowing your students, taking the time to get to know them, get to know what works for them, and letting them tell you what works or not. And letting them, if they need to go and take a break and then come back to you, giving them that option. But also, one of the things that I think we sometimes forget during online classes, which is just so, so vital, is the importance of movement. And, there's a wonderful quote which says, if the bum is numb, the brain is the same. Which basically means if we want the brain to be active, we need to keep moving. And there is so much research to back how movement aids in learning. And we need to give movement breaks even in our online sessions. And again, research that goes from lower grades all the way up into high school, saying that children that were struggling with math and science, if they did PE or physical education exercises just before their math or science class, it actually, the trajectory of growth was just exponential because they had done movement before. They activated the brain. Movement optimizes the brain for learning. It's like brain fertilizer. So they primed their brain for learning, and then whatever they were doing after that was able to, there was stronger retention for that. So even online, there's so many ways to build in little movement breaks in your classes.
And that is so fascinating. I mean, to know that it has a direct implication on their performance in something like math and science. I mean, we all know that movement is good for kids, but then to actually show concrete evidence that it impacts is really, really interesting. And I really love what you said about how important it is for teachers to know their students. I think it all comes down to that at the end of the day. That's really what big words like differentiation and all of that means. It's just you know your student. And so even in an online setting, if we as teachers can incorporate a little bit of time into the lesson plans instead of trying to teach for the entire hour, can we incorporate time for little check-ins, making sure that every child has understood what's going on, whether they can, whether we can involve movement into the lesson as well. I think all of that would be really, really useful. So I really love those points, Samara. So I'd like to move on to the next sort of segment, which is I think we've spoken a lot about how teachers can support students, but I'd love to hear your thoughts, Samara, on how we can support teachers, how the system, how schools can support teachers in this process of making sure they meet every student's needs in the classroom.
I think, that's one of the things, and that's why I got into teacher training as well, is really we need to arm teachers with this knowledge of diversity of minds and how we all have gifts and we all have strengths. And how do we use those strengths to meet all the other demands that we might have, our curriculum demands, and, the approach we use. And so I think our teacher training courses really do need to share the science, the learning, the understanding on the diversity of the mind. And, whether that's our BEd courses, our masters, or whether we even look at it as ongoing professional development. And there's so many options available today with online courses and short courses that I think schools really need to invest in their teachers and support them so that they can understand the diversity in their classroom to do justice to all children. And today, our curriculums are moving in that direction. I know with the CBSC, there's this whole movement towards art integrated curriculum and bringing different disciplines together and using project-based learning. Now, we need to equip teachers with the knowledge so that we're not just throwing them in the deep end. And the move for our curriculums in this direction has been to reach all learners and to make learning more meaningful and joyful. So I think the first thing schools need to do is invest in their teachers, bring in people with the knowledge to have ongoing professional developments. I think another thing is have the specialists in your schools. And, whether that's throughout the year, whether they're coming in depending on the resources that you have available, but not only having specialists to pull children out, but having specialists that can go into the classroom as well with children, and so that they can work alongside a teacher and they can learn from one another and create lessons that would meet most of the children in their classroom, if not all. And even creating a community within your teachers, whether it's in your school or resources that you can pull on from outside, where a teacher can say, you know what, I've got, and some of our schools have 50 and 52 children, in a classroom, that I'm worried about 3 or 4 children in my classroom. Can someone else come in and observe them during my session so you can give me feedback? Or can you observe my teaching practice to say, was it something I did that I was leaving children behind? Is it the way I asked the question? Is it the way I taught? So let us all start leaning on one another and creating these mentorship programs or this professional learning community.
I think that's so important. And I love what you said about how we can integrate specialists, not just for pulling kids out, but also coming into the classroom and helping and supporting teachers in that process. And if schools could also maybe organize their timetables a little bit differently, so that it's teachers also have some periods that are just dedicated to learning support itself. Otherwise, what often happens is, if a student is falling behind, they have to go meet the teacher during their lunch break or after hours, and it's or during their art class. Somehow it's always the art and PT classes that get missed out for the learning support. And those are, as you pointed out earlier, those are actually most important for the development and long-term learning. So can schools, maybe carve out that time for their teachers to meet students, and so that would make it, I think, a lot easier for teachers to get to know their kids and connect with them and really know how they can meet every student's needs. And I love what you said about the mentorship programs among teachers, and I know you've spoken about that as well before, about how it doesn't have to be just within the same school, right? It can you can also create community, and I think that's what you are doing as well, right?
But I think it's so vital that you mentioned that, we need to carve out times within our daily schedule where we can have those check-ins with children, rather than taking away the times that they actually need, their break, their PE, their art, things that not only provide joy, but also lay the foundation for learning. Um, so I think that is so, so vital. And we need to be conscious of creating that time within the day. So it's not a punishment for children that, okay, you can finish your worksheet and now you don't go out for break.
Yeah. Sorry, I think I might have lost you for a minute
Yes,
there because
yes,
my
sorry.
but
No, so I was just
sorry
saying,
about that.
no worries. I was just saying that it is vital that we carve out times within our daily schedule for those check-ins with children.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And also what you said about teachers supporting each other, and I think it's also really important to involve parents as partners in this process, right? I mean, it's so important to orient them about neurodiversity and to ensure that they're also not passing on those messages unconsciously to their kids about being normal, or comparing them to other kids. So what are your thoughts on that, Samara?
I mean, I think no one is more invested in the children than their parents, right? And so we really need to work with parents as partners. And it's, it's the school, it's the parents, it's the children. We all have to work together, because that's what we're all here for, right? Is ensuring children are successful. And parents are such a valuable resource. So, yes, it is about, as the teaching experts, us sharing our knowledge with parents, as well, but also parents know their children best, and really saying, okay, what do you think will work for your child? What can we do to support you with your child? And really creating this partnership
Yeah,
and open communication.
yeah. Well, I think we've now come to the end of our session, and I think it's been wonderful. We've spoken about the concept of neurodiversity and the difference between I mean the issues with the word normal, and how it's so important to hear voices from the neurodivergent community as well. We've spoken about how we as educators can change our mindsets towards our learners in the classroom and really work towards providing the support that they need, as well as how teachers themselves can be supported in their jobs, which is it's such a hard job. And our teachers, as you said, they're working so hard, especially right now, and they need all of the support from one another and from the schools. So I think this has been really wonderful. Samara, so what would be your big idea or big takeaway that you'd like to leave us with?
I think for me, if I could leave one message, it would just be about embracing neurodiversity and celebrating it. Knowing that this is part of human evolution. There is no better or worse, normal or abnormal, and we should stop trying to fit children within boxes or individuals, and really stop forcing the neuronormative expectations on children. And I think if that is something we can all go away with, we will really do more justice to the children that we work with and who are in our care.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Samara, for being here and for sharing your perspectives with us. And thank you to all of our viewers for tuning in. I hope you found the session informative and engaging. And we would love to hear from you as well if you have questions for Samara or myself or feedback on the session. We'll be sharing our contact details with you as well. So, yeah, thank you so much. And
Thank you for having me, Indra.
Samara.